Hi there, this is John here again, and this is another Stop and Think video. The government are saying that there are huge housing benefit bills in this country, and they're absolutely appalled by this, and they say that they have to cut housing benefits substantially. Now, this cut in housing benefit will have all sorts of problems attached to it. People will have to move to other parts of the country. We'll have ghettoisation of poor families. And as the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, said, it's actually intended, or it's going to produce a sort of social apartheid. So is there an alternative way of doing this? Well, certainly I recognise that the housing benefit bill needs to be cut. But how do you do this? Well, we can actually look at some of the causes of this burgeoning housing benefit bill to start off with. And once we identify the causes, we can also begin to have a look at some of the cures. Now, the first cause of this massive housing benefit bill is because council housing council housing was sold off in massive numbers, and this reduced the total amount of affordable rented housing in the country. Not a lot we can do about that right now. But the other cause was this: that the government back in 1989 deregulated the private sector, and they allowed market rents. Now, market rents had a number of unfortunate effects. For a start, huge amounts of money came in from abroad, from Japan and America and other places, to fuel the buy-to-let system. So people would buy houses not to live in, not because they were homes, but just so they could let out the housing. This pushed house prices up considerably, and this meant that people who should have been buying houses actually were forced to rent and to pay market rents for those houses. And this, Norman Lamont, back then, it was all pointed out to him that this would happen, and he said, let the housing benefit bill take the straw. Well, we now have a huge housing benefit bill that needs to be cut. So how do we cut the housing benefit bill but stop what Boris Johnson calls the social apartheid that is going to happen? Well, there is a very simple way of doing this. It's called fair rents. Back in 1977, the then Labour government introduced the Rent Act 1977 that said that we had to have fair rents. And a fair rent is very simple to calculate. A fair rent is a rent, you take a market rent and you say how much of that market rent is due to scarcity of this type of housing in the area. You knock off an amount for that scarcity and you get a fair rent. If the government were to reintroduce fair rents, this would instantly cut the housing benefit bill, and it would avoid the social apartheid that Boris Johnson wants to stop. You would also need some interim measures to actually help tenants not to be illegally evicted. You need to improve their security, tenure, their right to stay as well, and this could also be done through the existing rent officer structures and schemes. The advantages are that landlords would get a fair rent rather than a market rent, and the tenants will be paying a fair rent. Housing benefit will be cut, It would also help to end the poverty trap, where people can't afford to work because they can't afford to pay the rents, because the rents would now be fair, liberating people to go and get other jobs. So why doesn't the government do this? Well, I guess the feral elite of this government don't want to upset their mates, the property owners. Now, I can well imagine that there is an immediate objection. What happens if the landlords can't actually continue to pay the mortgages? Well, the first thing is that we have nationalised banks in this country, and they could actually be used to remortgage on low interest rates to help such landlords so that they can keep the properties. And we could certainly use that as a social policy instrument. The other possibility, the other, I suppose, concern is that if the landlords do default, then people could be made homeless. But that in itself could be solved by the courts offering interim security of tenure orders to actually temporarily extend the security of tenure, so it then becomes enforceable temporarily against the bank or building society that is repossessed. So it really is possible. But I guess David Cameron and his multi-millionaire cabinet just don't want to actually help people. It almost seems that they're deliberately wanting to create what our Mayor Boris Johnson called a social apartheid. We have, in theory, a functioning democracy. So why doesn't one of the parties come forward with the reintroduction of fair rents? Well, you tell me. Thanks for listening.